Beneath the fog of war, buried in the blood-soaked corners of history, there are stories too unsettling to be remembered, yet too powerful to forget. These are the moments scrubbed from official records, whispered only in shadows, where truth blurs into myth and the price of survival was something far worse than death. Step carefully. What you're about to uncover was never meant to see the light. Shadows over Warsaw, the secret radio of District Z. The first snowfall of 1942 blanketed Warsaw in a deceptive silence. The city, still reeling under the iron boot of Nazi occupation, pulsed quietly with whispers of resistance. Inside the crumbling tenement buildings of the Warsaw Ghetto, where barbed wire twisted through alleyways and starvation stalked the streets, a group of teenagers was building something impossible, a voice louder than fear. At the center was Dawid Zilberstein, a 17-year-old whose father had once been a radio technician for the Polish Broadcasting Company before the invasion. Dawid had salvaged parts from broken German field radios and dismantled Soviet sets buried under rubble, teaching himself circuitry by candlelight. But he was no leader alone. Mira Feldman, quick-witted and fluent in 4 languages, coordinated messages and encoded transmissions. Roman Wojcik, the youngest at only 15, was their runner, navigating sewers and bombed tram tunnels to avoid patrols. Together, they created Radio Zeta. It started small, a buzz of static, a burst of Polish folk music, and a voice cracking through the darkness. Asterisk, this is Zeta, the voice of Warsaw. We are still here. Asterisk, at first, the broadcasts were short, mere minutes long, relayed on a rotating schedule of frequencies to evade detection. They aired German troop movements, Allied war updates, and names of missing persons. The signal was weak, but it carried hope, spreading like an ember through the ruins. Dawid's equipment was hidden in a cellar under a bakery that baked nothing anymore. The room reeked of mold and metal, lit by a single oil lamp. He powered the transmitter using an old bicycle frame, which Roman pedaled furiously during broadcasts. On the wall was a map of Warsaw marked with pushpins and red string, every line representing danger, patrol paths, SS outposts, and rumored safehouses. In late February 1943, Radio Zeta took a bold turn. Mira, who had family ties to a courier in the Polish Home Army, acquired a stolen German operations manual. It contained details about deportations and execution orders scheduled for the next month. They broadcast the information nightly, warning residents to evacuate targeted blocks. The Nazi response was immediate and brutal. Public hangings resumed. Rewards were offered for information about the broadcasts. Yet Zeta refused to go silent. Their signal began reaching beyond the ghetto walls. British SOE agents operating in occupied Poland noted their codes in field reports. At Bletchley Park, MI6 began referring to their messages as Flicker 9, noting the amateur signal's uncanny accuracy. Dawid never knew this. He only knew the voice he gave Warsaw now echoed through a wider world. The closer they came to the edge of exposure, the more daring they became. On April 19, 1943, the day the Warsaw Ghetto uprising began, Radio Zeta transmitted live. The voice on air, Myra's, crackled through static as gunfire roared in the background. Asterisk, this is Zeta. We fight today with fire and cobblestone. Do not forget us. Tell the world we were not afraid. Asterisk. The final minutes of that broadcast would later be transcribed by a BBC war correspondent and read aloud by Winston Churchill in Parliament. By the 4th day of the uprising, the Nazis had begun using radio detection vans. Roman was captured while running a message to a courier near the Umschlagplatz. He was tortured, then executed in public. His body was left hanging from a lamppost as a warning. Dawid, racked with guilt, wanted to shut the station down, but Mira refused. We stop now, Roman dies for nothing, she said. The 5th broadcast after Roman's death was almost entirely in Morse code. Mira sent out every cipher key they had left, a final gift to the Allies and the resistance. That night, their hideout was discovered. The Gestapo raided the bakery at dawn. Dawid smashed the equipment with a wrench while Mira frantically burned codebooks. They tried to flee through the sewer, but Myra's foot caught in a grate. She shoved Dawid forward. Asterisk, you have the map, David. You finish this. Asterisk. He escaped. She did not. David fled Warsaw disguised as a chimney sweep, carrying only a satchel containing their last broadcast tape and Myra's notebook filled with half-burnt codes. He joined a partisan unit in Lublin and eventually made his way to London through a network of Allied couriers. There, the remaining recordings of Radio Zeta were archived by the Polish government in exile, but the story faded into obscurity, buried under larger victories and grander tales of war. Decades later, in 1993, an old woman named Anna Kowalska donated a trunk to a historical institute in Berlin. Inside were Nazi documents, photographs, and Myra's notebook. Anna, once a secretary for a Gestapo officer, had stolen it the day Mira was executed. She had kept it hidden, unable to forgive herself for the silence. The rediscovery led to a wave of recognition. Radio Zeta's broadcasts were remastered, translated, and aired across Europe during the 60th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Schoolchildren in Poland now study Zeta in history class. A small plaque marks the ruins of the bakery in Warsaw. Asterisk here, words became weapons. Asterisk. David never returned to Poland. He lived out his days in Leeds, where he taught radio engineering at a technical college. He never remarried after losing Mira. On his deathbed, he whispered to his nurse, "If you ever hear a voice in the static, listen. That's us." Radio Zeta was never the loudest signal. It was never meant to be. But in the darkest chapter of human cruelty, it proved that even in silence, resistance can be heard. Operation Ashes: The Forgotten Arctic War. In the waning months of 1944, as the world's attention was locked on Normandy's beaches and the burning cities of Europe, a strange and secret operation unfolded far to the north, so remote that it would not come to light until a Norwegian trapper stumbled across a frozen corpse clutching a Japanese flag in 1987. The mission was codenamed Operation Ashes, and it was the only known instance of Japanese and German forces collaborating face-to-face on European soil. Svalbard, an icy Norwegian archipelago nestled within the Arctic Circle, had long been a strategic interest due to its unique position for meteorological observation. Accurate weather forecasts were crucial for U-boat deployments and Luftwaffe operations. The Allies had established temporary stations there, but the harsh conditions made permanent occupation nearly impossible. In the summer of 1944, with the tide of war turning against the Axis, the High Command of Nazi Germany reached out to their far-flung ally, Imperial Japan. The request was simple: send a team of skilled meteorologists and radio operators to man a top-secret joint outpost alongside German forces. Tokyo, eager to prove continued relevance in the European theater, obliged. 12 men landed on Svalbard aboard a disguised fishing trawler, 6 German naval officers, and 6 Japanese specialists from the Japanese Meteorological Corps. Among them were Commander Otto Wessler, a hardline Wehrmacht scientist who had overseen Arctic training drills in Greenland, and Lieutenant Akihiko Mori, a Kyoto-educated climatologist known for his calm demeanor and devout Shinto beliefs. Their destination was an abandoned coal mining facility buried in the ice, a place the German maps simply called Station Kappa. The outpost was a bitter, frozen tomb. Half the buildings had collapsed under snow, and supplies were scarce. Their only means of contact with Berlin and Tokyo was a long-range shortwave radio, which required frequent maintenance and constant power. Food rations had to be supplemented with seal meat and canned herring. The sun vanished for months. Cold, not the Allies, became the enemy. Tensions surfaced almost immediately. The Germans, blunt, methodical, authoritarian, saw the Japanese as strange, overly spiritual, too silent. The Japanese, disciplined, precise, proud, found the Germans brash, culturally ignorant, and disrespectful of the land. Communication was strained, passing through broken English or second-hand Russian. But Commander Wessler and Lieutenant Mori understood the stakes. They shared the belief that survival depended on unity. Each night, they met in the radio room over weak tea brewed from melted snow, plotting wind charts and deciphering cloud patterns. The Arctic made national borders irrelevant. It stripped men to their essence. Then, in November, disaster struck. A British reconnaissance plane, part of Operation Fritham, spotted a flicker of light from the station's chimney. Days later, a small team of Norwegian commandos, trained by the British and airdropped onto the ice, began a silent approach. They used snowshoes and sled dogs, blending with the endless white. On December 3rd, they launched a pre-dawn raid. The outpost was caught off guard. 3 Germans were killed in their bunks. A fourth, in desperation, detonated a flare that exposed the station to aerial detection. But the Japanese contingent responded with chilling efficiency. Trained in silent bayonet combat, they flanked the attackers, killing 2 and capturing a third. Commander Wessler was furious. His surviving men demanded retaliation. Lieutenant Maury refused. He insisted the prisoner be treated with honor. For 4 days, the prisoner, Private Einar Skarsgård, was interrogated, fed, and allowed to write a letter to his wife in Bergen. He warned them of an Allied push to retake Arctic weather routes. The Axis forces at Station Kappa were now a liability. On December 10th, Berlin sent a coded message, *, destroy equipment. Evacuate immediately. *, but Tokyo countermanded the order. The Japanese command demanded continued occupation, fearing loss of prestige if they abandoned the outpost without resistance. The alliance began to fracture. As temperatures plunged to -40 degrees, supplies dwindled. The men, once cold professionals, now broke into arguments and fights. Cultural clashes deepened about discipline, loyalty, the concept of death. One German, Officer Kessler, accused the Japanese of sabotage after the generator failed. Lieutenant Maury struck him with a shovel. Kessler bled out overnight. No one spoke of it again. By January, frostbite had claimed 2 more men. The prisoner, Einar, attempted escape and was shot in the snow. His blood froze midstream on the ground, a crimson sculpture in white. Then came the avalanche. On January 23rd, a tremor, possibly triggered by shelling from a patrolling British submarine, shook the ridge behind the outpost. Tons of snow crushed half the barracks. 3 more perished. The radio antenna was sheared in half. They were now completely alone. Commander Wessler went mad. He took to scribbling equations in blood on the ice walls. One night, he wandered into the storm, barefoot and laughing, quoting Goethe. His body was never found. Maury remained. With only one other Japanese officer, Sergeant Naoji Takeda, they maintained the final transmissions using makeshift copper wires and salvaged batteries. On February 9th, they sent a final, cryptic message in Morse code. *, ashes to snow. All winds lead home. Farewell, son. *. No further signals came from Station Kappa. Years passed. Snow buried the remains of Operation Ashes. The war ended. The Cold War began. The world moved on. Svalbard became a realm of science and treaty, its blood-soaked history forgotten. Until 1987. A Norwegian trapper named Lars Nyberg, hunting polar bears near Fjorden, discovered a half-exposed structure under a collapsed glacier. Inside, he found frozen bodies in tattered uniforms, a cracked German helmet, and a Japanese katana embedded in a wooden beam. Most haunting of all was a journal, water-damaged, pages fused by ice, belonging to Lieutenant Maury. The final entry read, *, the storm has no face, no flag. We are brothers in frost. If they find us, let them learn, not all wars are fought by hatred. Some by silence, some by cold. *. Operation Ashes has since become a footnote in the vast, tragic ledger of the Second World War. But to those who know it, it stands as a bitter monument to loyalty, cultural pride, and the human spirit tested against nature's final frontier. The Lioness of Toulon. They called her La Lionne, but her real name was Elise Marchand, a quiet widow with spectacles and graying hair who ran a dusty municipal library near the Toulon docks. Her husband, a naval officer, had been killed during the scuttling of the French fleet in 1942. After his death, she was left with a creaky apartment above the library and a pension that barely covered bread. But beneath her modest, bookish exterior lay one of the sharpest minds in the French resistance. Her first act of defiance was born not out of ideology, but heartbreak. When German officers began requisitioning her library for their own use, confiscating shelves of banned literature and using her reading room for cultural enrichment, Elise resisted in her own way. She began recataloguing the books using a fake Dewey system, disguising subversive material under theological or classical categories. By the time the Gestapo realized what she was doing, it was too late. Half the officers had unknowingly read anti-Nazi manifestos disguised as Roman history. But that was just the beginning. Through an old friend at the University of Aix, Elise made contact with a regional cell of the Maquis, the rural French resistance fighters. They needed help decoding intercepted German transmissions. Elise offered more. She created an entire cipher system using Latin conjugations and library stamps. She called it Asterisk, Bibliacode. Asterisk. The Maquis were stunned. No one suspected that this demure librarian had once studied cryptography in Lyon before the war, or that she had published academic papers under a male pseudonym. Her methods were meticulous. Resistance fighters disguised as delivery boys dropped off returns at the library, which were actually weapons manuals or radio parts hidden in hollowed-out encyclopedias. Elise stashed them between floorboards, inside heating vents, even under a false bottom in a banned copy of Mein Kampf. The Germans underestimated her. She served them tea while they used her reading room. They smiled at her, asked her to recommend books for their wives. One SS lieutenant flirted with her regularly. She smiled back, nodded sweetly, and later slipped him a doctored copy of The Sorrows of Young Werther with a map to a planned sabotage site folded inside. He never knew. The bridge he was meant to guard exploded a week later. In spring of 1944, Elise took a bold step. She offered to act as a direct liaison with the OSS, the American intelligence agency operating in Vichy, France. Her role was to collect and memorize key details, troop deployments, supply movements, Gestapo patterns, and relay them through microfilm encoded in library ink on overdue notices. Her photographic memory made her invaluable. She never wrote down a name. Not once. It was during this time that she earned her moniker. A captured resistance courier under torture spoke only a name, the Lioness. He described her as cunning, fearless, and untraceable. The Gestapo dismissed it at first, asterisk a lioness, in Toulon. Asterisk the only woman who fit the profile was that boring librarian who served chamomile tea and wore knit shawls. But the resistance knew better. In July 1944, Elise coordinated one of the most audacious sabotage missions in southern France. Toulon's port, heavily fortified by German naval forces, was due to receive a shipment of panzer reinforcements by sea. If they docked successfully, they could crush the Allied landings pushing up from Operation Dragoon. Elise devised a plan to sabotage the dock cranes by inserting slow-fuse charges inside the hollow supports. She personally delivered the components, hidden inside a crate of donated books, to dockworkers sympathetic to the cause. On the night of July 17th, as the convoy approached, the explosives detonated precisely. The cranes collapsed like snapped matchsticks, sending one German supply ship into a pier and triggering a massive fire. The harbor was rendered unusable for days. German retaliation was swift and indiscriminate. Dozens of civilians were rounded up, several executed. Elise vanished. For 2 weeks, she hid in the catacombs beneath the Toulon Cathedral, surviving on tinned fish and water from condensation pipes. Her disguise, a nun's habit taken from a buried crate used in earlier smuggling missions, saved her life when a Gestapo patrol swept the area. When she emerged, she was thinner, weaker, but her resolve was steel. The Allies had landed. The resistance was mobilizing. And the Lioness had one more mission to complete. She planned to intercept and destroy a convoy of documents en route from Toulon to Marseille, records detailing resistance members across the entire province region. If they reached Gestapo headquarters, hundreds would die. With the help of a young railway worker named Henri Rousseau, she rigged the train's braking system to malfunction on a descent into a mountain pass. As it picked up speed, Elise and Henri jumped off. The train derailed spectacularly. Fire consumed the car carrying the files. No survivors were recovered. But neither was Elise. Her body was never found. Some say she died in the crash. Others claimed she escaped across the border into neutral Switzerland. In the chaos of liberation, her name became a whisper, a legend passed between old partisans and OSS agents. The Americans listed her as missing, presumed dead. The Maquis called her a martyr. But in 1968, a Parisian used book dealer opened a crate left unclaimed since the war. Inside were a stack of banned books, 2 OSS microfilm reels, and a first-edition copy of Les Miserables with an inscription written in delicate ink. Asterisk, for those who speak truth quietly, and roar only when necessary. E.M. Asterisk. Elise Marchand, the Lioness of Toulon, never needed medals. Her battlefield was between shelves. Her weapons were knowledge, silence, and conviction. She fought not with bullets, but with memory and myth. And in doing so, she reminded the world that even the quietest voice can echo loudest when tyranny knocks at the door. The Boy with the Tin Violin. In the bomb-ravaged city of Warsaw, 1943, where the scent of smoke and ash never truly left the air, a strange melody sometimes drifted through the ruins. Haunting, fragile, and somehow untouched by the filth of war, it came not from a radio or a military band, but from a small boy in a torn wool coat, playing a violin made of salvaged metal and string. His name was Aleksander Kozlowski. He was 9 years old when the Germans sealed the Warsaw Ghetto. His father, a violinist for the Warsaw Philharmonic, was taken during the first wave of arrests. His mother died 6 months later of typhus. That left Alexander alone, surviving on bread crusts, stolen soup, and the kindness of an old watchmaker named Tuvia who taught him how to fix broken things, including his father's shattered violin. The original instrument was destroyed in a German raid. Alexander found its remains in the rubble, a cracked neck, splintered body, and strings like veins torn from a corpse. But he could not bear to let it go. With Tuvia's help, he began to remake it, using tin scraps from downed planes, wire from an old radio, and wood salvaged from broken furniture. The result was crude, jagged, and barely tunable. But it made music. And that was enough. At night, when the guards weren't listening, Alexander played for the children hiding in cellars and crawlspaces. He played lullabies his mother used to hum, and Jewish folk songs he barely remembered. But his favorite was a simple, wordless melody he claimed had no name, only a feeling. He said it reminded him of the smell of spring rain before the war. Soon, whispers of the boy with the tin violin spread through the ghetto. Some called him a ghost, others a miracle. He became a symbol of something the Germans could not burn: memory. Then came Operation Reinhard, the final liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto. In April 1943, the SS moved in with tanks and flamethrowers, determined to crush the growing Jewish resistance. Bunkers were raided, buildings torched, children shot in alleys. But amidst the horror, the fighters held strong, many of them teenagers with pistols and homemade grenades. They had nothing to lose. Alexander was not a fighter. He had no weapon, no training. But he had a purpose. On April 23, as the main synagogue burned, a resistance courier named Liba Schindler, barely 16 herself, found Alexander crouched in a stairwell, clutching his violin. "They're closing in," she said. "We have to move." Alexander looked at the flames in the distance. Then he asked her a question she would never forget. "If I play, will the world hear me?" She didn't know how to answer. But he played. Liba lifted him onto a table in the center of a half-collapsed courtyard. And there, surrounded by fighters, corpses, and smoke, Alexander played his unnamed song, one last time. The sound was warped by the tin, off-key, delicate. But it pierced the night like a cry from the soul of a dying city. German troops entered the square minutes later. Liba pulled Alexander down. Shots rang out. She shielded him with her body. A bullet struck her leg, then her shoulder. But Alexander was untouched. They escaped through sewer tunnels, carrying nothing but the violin wrapped in Liba's blood-soaked shawl. The uprising was crushed. Nearly all who remained were deported or executed. But Alexander and Liba survived, first in the sewers, then in the forest, where they were taken in by Polish partisans. Liba recovered slowly. Alexander never spoke of that night again. In the years after the war, Alexander was smuggled to Britain as part of a refugee relocation program. He lived with a family in Manchester, studied music at a local school, and rarely mentioned his past. He played the tin violin only once more, at a memorial for the Warsaw Ghetto uprising on its 10th anniversary. Then he locked it away in a drawer and took up the cello instead. He would later say the violin had already said what it needed to. Liba survived too. She settled in Haifa and became a schoolteacher. For decades, she tried to find Alexander, writing letters to immigration offices, embassies, and historical committees. None reached him. It was only in 1992, when she attended a Holocaust remembrance concert in London, that she saw a name in the program. Alexander Kozlowski, conductor. She approached him backstage, unsure he would remember. But before she could speak, he took her hand and quietly said, "I've been trying to find you." He handed her the tin violin, restored, polished, wrapped in the same shawl. That night, he didn't conduct. He played. For her. For Warsaw. For those who didn't survive. The melody still had no name. In 2003, when Alexander passed away at the age of 69, the violin was donated to the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. It rests in a glass case, strings rusted, the body still marked with tiny burns and bullet scars. The placard beneath it reads, he asked if the world would hear him. Now it listens. The boy with the tin violin never fired a shot. But he fought, with beauty. And in the silence that followed his song, a generation found the strength to remember. The Pacific Phantom. In the waning months of World War II, as the United States island hopped toward Japan, whispers circulated among American and Japanese troops alike about a ghostly figure stalking the jungles of the Pacific. Some claimed he was an American sniper too good to be human. Others said he was a spirit sent by the souls of the dead. His name, passed between foxholes and command tents, was the Phantom. But he was real. His name was Captain Raymond Keller, a U.S. Marine scout sniper from Montana, and his kill count remained classified until decades later. Raymond had joined the Marines in 1941 after Pearl Harbor, and by the time of Guadalcanal in late 1942, he'd already earned a reputation as a man who moved like shadow and saw like hawk. But it was on the island of Peleliu, during one of the bloodiest and most overlooked battles of the Pacific, that the legend truly began. The terrain was hell, sharp coral, oppressive heat, and caves carved into the limestone ridges that the Japanese used as bunkers. American forces took over 40% casualties in the first few days. Keller, assigned to 1st Marine Division's reconnaissance unit, disappeared on his own for long stretches, slipping into enemy territory without orders. His COs reprimanded him at first, until they realized that every time he vanished, he returned with a dozen Japanese dog tags and detailed notes on enemy positions. One time, he crawled 300 yards through razor grass in complete silence to mark the entrance to an enemy munitions cache. He didn't carry a radio. He memorized coordinates and scrawled them in the dirt with a stick for his spotter. Within hours, the Navy leveled the site. Keller's most infamous mission came on Okinawa, in May 1945. By then, American forces were grinding through the Shuri Line, a web of fortified ridges and tunnels defended by entrenched Japanese forces under General Mitsuru Ushijima. Morale was low. The rain was constant. And the enemy refused to surrender. That's when Keller was given an unofficial task: eliminate Colonel Haruki Takeda, a brutal tactician known for orchestrating night raids that slaughtered hundreds of American troops. Intelligence placed Takeda's operations post somewhere near the village of Yejidake, hidden inside a cave complex. Recon units had failed to penetrate it. Keller volunteered. He left at dusk, dressed in rags, face painted with ash. No rifle. Just a knife, a .45 sidearm, a map, and 3 days' worth of food. He returned 4 days later, limping, blood-soaked, dragging Takeda's katana behind him. He never spoke of what happened inside the caves. But a medic reported that Keller's hands were burned from hot metal and his sidearm was empty. Command awarded him a silver star, but he refused to attend the ceremony. Instead, he asked to be reassigned to scouting duty in the southern ridges, where kamikaze squads were rumored to be preparing last-ditch attacks. There, the legend grew. Japanese soldiers, often isolated and desperate, began reporting encounters with an unseen shooter. One night, a platoon was ambushed in a ravine. Every man was shot through the eye or temple. No wasted bullets, no noise, no survivors. The Japanese commander called it an assassin of the wind. American soldiers, equally spooked, began referring to Keller by his nickname, the Pacific Phantom. He was rarely seen. When spotted, he moved low and slow, disappearing into palm fronds, wearing a ghillie suit made from tattered marine uniforms and jungle foliage. Some even said he could walk barefoot across coral and never leave a footprint. In reality, Keller was a man consumed by the war. After Okinawa, he stopped speaking to most of his unit. He declined leave. He barely ate. His only companion was a young Navajo code talker named Ben Yazzie, who served as his spotter. Ben later wrote in his journal, Raymond saw ghosts. Not just of the enemy. Of ours. Men who died under his command. He thought if he kept fighting, maybe they'd leave him alone. In August 1945, the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war ended within weeks. American units began pulling out. Keller vanished. 4 months, he was listed MIA. Then, in early 1946, a supply officer on the island of Tinian reported a strange sight, a figure in tattered marine gear, filthy and bearded, kneeling beside an unmarked grave under a breadfruit tree. It was Keller. He had stayed behind, believing the war wasn't truly over. He'd been living off rainwater, roots, and canned rations from abandoned depots. He was gaunt, exhausted, and barely coherent. They shipped him home in silence. Raymond Keller never spoke publicly again. He refused interviews, turned down medals, and declined to attend the Marine Corps reunions. He settled in northern Montana, where he built a cabin near the treeline and worked as a hunting guide. Locals described him as polite but distant. When children asked if he'd fought in the war, he would only smile and say, "No, I watched it." He died in 1989. His only surviving possession was a journal filled with sketches of jungle terrain, lists of names, many of them Japanese, and a drawing of a katana with the inscription, "I did not hate them. I feared becoming them." After his death, military historians pieced together his record. Unofficial estimates placed his confirmed kills at over 150, possibly more. But most agreed that Keller's real legacy wasn't his kill count, it was his silence. He embodied a war fought in shadows, where survival meant more than glory. Today, at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, there is no grand exhibit for Captain Raymond Keller. Just a single photograph, a man crouched in the jungle, face painted, eyes sharp as a knife. No caption. You have to ask the docent who he was. And when you do, they'll tell you. That was the Phantom. He never wanted to be remembered. But we do it anyway. You've heard the names. You've seen the battles. But behind every flag, every bullet, every silence, there were choices. Unspeakable ones. The kind that echo long after the guns fall quiet. Some ghosts wear uniforms. Others wear innocence. And the most terrifying truth of all? We invited them in. History remembers the victors. But what it forgets might be hiding in plain sight.